Special. Today I will show you how to set your bike up perfectly and how to find the optimal suspension setting. By adjusting the suspension, it's important to set the air pressure both in the fork and the shock absorber, followed by setting the rebound damping, which controls the release speed rate of your suspension system. To make sure that the suspension will work perfectly, we have to adjust the fork and rear shock according to our body weight. We will start with the fork. If the fork, like in this case, has a travel adjustment, the fork must be extended completely. Before we adjust the suspension elements, it's important to open the adjustment dials for compression and rebound damping until the fork can compress freely. Normally, the compression damping is sitting here on the top. In this special case, the fork has a damping platform that we need to deactivate by rotating the dial counterclockwise to the body stop. To set the negative suspension, the so-called SAG, it's essential that we have a rubber ring on the fork. Either it's pre-installed or we have to use cable straps. The SAG is the area below. It's the one that adjusts itself when you sit down in your full outfit on the bike. It ensures that the wheel stays in contact with the ground when you drive through small pits. Usually it should be between 20% and 30% of the entire suspension. To set this, you can either get help from a friend or lean against a table or a wall, because it's important that you sit with your complete weight and both legs on the bike, optimally with the backpack and all the equipment which you intend to use when cycling. You position yourself in the normal driving position, which is centered over the bike, and test the spring elements a couple of times. We push the rubber ring down and then carefully step off the bike without moving the rubber ring. Then we can measure the SAG. In this case, it is 60 millimeters, so the fork is actually too soft because it should be 20% of the fork travel, which is 150 millimeters, which means the best setting is 30 millimeters. This means that the fork is now too soft for me. To inflate the fork and the damper, you need a special pump called a shock pump. We'll start with the fork. There is one trick. To get easier access to the air valve on Fox forks, which is hidden up here, turn the dial to the minus setting. In the lowered position, the dial is a little higher up, and you can unscrew it much easier. Then go back to the extended position before pumping. If there is no recommended air pressure in the manual or printed on the fork, you have to do some trial and error. So, just pump a small amount of air bit by bit and repeat this like we just did to determine the right SAG at 20–25%. Push the rubber ring down and dismount the bike carefully. It's now exactly 35 millimeters, which is perfect. Now that the air pressure in the fork fits, we'll take care of the damping. When we talk about damping, we have to differentiate rebound from compression damping. The rebound of the fork controls is the rebound speed, and compression damping controls the compression speed. First, we set the rebound. For this, we need the dial for the spring preload, which is usually red. This must be screwed all the way around counterclockwise. Not all forks have compression damping. It usually only comes with the models that are a bit more expensive. It's important that the compression damping is also turned all the way around before we set the rebound, just like we did before when we set the spring rate. To adjust rebound, we need to pull the front brake and put all your weight onto the bike in a quick dynamic movement and then quickly release pressure from the handlebar. This way we are able to see how fast the fork comes out, and then we should increase the rebound click by click until the front wheel does not come off the ground anymore. Before we set the rebound on the shock, we must also turn the rebound dial completely counterclockwise. The easiest way to test how fast the rebound of the rear shock is to go outside. You should look for a curb and ride down it. Now check how often the rear shock comes out again when it's compressed. It's optimal when the rear goes down and briefly rebounds, and the wheel is then stabilized again, optimally 1.5 times. Watch this as an example. Check the saddle's movement and see how fast or how often the shock comes out again when it compresses. The rebound should go down once, come up again, and then stop. Like with the fork, we now set the air pressure for the rear shock. We need to put ourselves back in the starting position on the bike and move the spring elements a few times. Then gently push up the rubber ring and measure the SAG after getting off the bike. The SAG on the rear shock should be between 25 and 30%. So, the chassis fits, have fun on the trail. In the next part, I'll show you a lot about handles, wheels and tires. Hello and welcome to the second part of our DIY special. Today I will show you how to set your bike up perfectly and how to find the optimal suspension setting. By adjusting the suspension, it's important to set the air pressure both in the fork and the shock absorber, followed by setting the rebound damping, which controls the release speed rate of your suspension system. To make sure that the suspension will work perfectly, we have to adjust the fork and rear shock according to our body weight. We will start with the fork. If the fork, like in this case, has a travel adjustment, the fork must be extended completely. Before we adjust the suspension,